great to have you all on this webinar. My name is Rohan Hazel, and I'm the Managing Director of GIFT.ed, and it's my great pleasure to open what promises to be a really thought-provoking series of conversations held between GIFT.ed and also the Club of Rome. So for those of you who don't know us, GIFT.ed, we are a global knowledge platform born from the Global Institute for Tomorrow, or GIFT, which is a think tank dedicated to empowering professionals and leaders with the insights needed to navigate and redesign our complex and rapidly changing world. So today really marks a milestone for us as we launch this new partnership with the Club of Rome, which many of you will know is one of the world's foremost scientific think tanks, renowned for its work on the limits to growth and, of course, the long-term sustainability of human civilization as a whole. So across this webinar series with the Club of Rome, we'll explore the concept of regenerative organizations and economies, not simply as a sustainable need, but as a novel approach to leadership, value creation, and of course, societal well-being. So over the coming months, this series will bring you conversations with some of the most impactful thought leaders working at the intersection of systems change, sustainability, ethical governance, of course, business as well. And so now I'm delighted to introduce the interviewer for today's session. That's Chandran Nair. Chandran is the founder of the Global Institute for Tomorrow and chairman of GIFT.ed. As the former APAC chairman at ERM, he's a global business executive and thought leader whose views on the emergence of the post-Western world and sustainable development have challenged conventional development paradigms globally. And I'm also very pleased to welcome our speaker for today, and that's none other than Carlos Álvarez Pereira, the Secretary General of the Club of Rome. Carlos has an extremely decorated career. So as a member of the advisory board of the International Bateson Institute, he's a fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science and a member of the Spanish Fulbright Alumni Association. And he's been a lecturer in applied mathematics at the Polytechnic University of Madrid and has, of course, also founded the Anaxis Foundation and Research Institute. So Carlos's expertise has culminated in a unique blend of systems thinking and grounded strategy that really uniquely places him to advise on regenerative business and epistemic redesign. So it's a real pleasure to have you both on this call. The final thing from me is to say that to the audience, thank you for coming. Great to have you. And I hope this webinar stimulates some thinking on the regenerative possibilities ahead of us. If you have any questions as the webinar proceeds, please just drop them into the Q&A and we'll do our best to get to them. So that's all from me. Chandran, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rohan. Everyone, thank you for joining us. I know we have people from all over the world, and we are delighted that we can put forward this series of dialogues with different members of the Club of Rome. Carlos, I've known you for several years. As Rohan described very briefly, you have a much more distinguished background and academic career than I have. But I'll continue to pretend that I can engage with people like you. So it's been a pleasure knowing you for all of these years. And from speaking from the perspective of the Global Institute for Tomorrow, I can say that we are all delighted to have the Secretary General of the Club of Rome join us on this first dialogue. And if you told me 3 years ago when we started GIFT.ed, that we would have a MOU with the Club of Rome, and we would be able to have a series like this, and that the inaugural one would have you, the Secretary General, join us, I would have said, dream on. So, I'm very proud, humbled, and privileged to have you join us today. To everyone who's joining us, I'm sitting in my office in Kuala Lumpur today. I'm typically based between Hong Kong and KL, but today I'm in KL. I think we're about to have a heavy thunderstorm, but that's the tropics. Carlos, I believe you are in Madrid today, and
Yes.
I look forward to everyone participating and asking us a lot of questions. So this subject of the regenerative economy, people like us, Carlos, who perhaps indulge in the narrative about what it is and even assume that we are the ones who should define it, have very different versions of all of this. So I know you've prepared to some statements to let us understand what your understanding is and also what your learnings have been on this complex topic. So let me hand the floor over to you to start the conversation with your opening remarks. Over to you, Carlos.
Thank you, Chandran and team. I was getting embarrassed by your compliments because the privilege, I really feel the privilege is mine, and we have ahead of us exciting opportunities for collaboration. I feel particularly privileged to have the opportunity to address audiences that are not typically the ones I can speak with, particularly from what I call most of the world, and I guess in particular Asia, Southeast Asia, and Far East. So very interesting occasion, and I have for you to start with five strong messages that I try to summarize in one or two words. The first of which is pluriversality. To be clear, I'm not here as a teacher. I'm not going to teach anybody what is regenerative business or regenerative economies, because for one, I don't think we have this as a recipe yet, by far. But even more important than that, because I am particularly for this idea, I'm against the concept that someone has the recipe for the whole world. I know that the world order has been built very much in the last decades and to some extent in the last centuries around the idea of centrality, and several circles around that center. And the center is where power is concentrated and where wealth is concentrated. And when the idea of what is correct or what is not correct is concentrated in that center. I think the world has practically never been like that, and the tensions emerging from the reality, the real world, and this framework of centrality has created a huge amount of tensions and destruction of ecosystems, but also of peoples and cultures. And my first reflection is that regeneration is about overcoming that. And it cannot be done from a center, whether the same center or another one. So this is why I use the word pluriversality in contrast with universality, which, as you know, comes very much from France. I was born in Paris. I'm bicultural in French culture, language, and culture, but at the same time, a French philosopher, Barbara Cassin, said that what happens with the universal, that it is always the universal of somebody. So we have to overcome that also because regeneration is about reconnecting with life, with nature, making peace with nature, stopping this massive destruction of ecosystems. And then if we look at nature, we realize that there is not a center. There are not universal laws, not even the few ones that science proposes as sort of universal explanations. With the scientific method, they are not universal laws, but there are only a handful of explanations like that. And what you see is life is so diverse, so always so contextual and adapted to local conditions, to local geography and history. So this is my first message, pluriversality. People have to take this bull of regeneration by the horns in their own context and not feel that they are not allowed or that they don't have the capacity to do that, or they have to learn that from somebody providing, the official recipe. The second reflection is, particularly in the context of business, I've been an entrepreneur myself for more than 20 years. So I've lived this kind of experience. The second reflection, in a word, is strategy. And this idea of regeneration cannot be a nice to have, cannot be something cannot be an obligation. It is not a matter of compliance. Either it is part of the strategy or it is fake. And of course, we have seen a lot of that, of fake versions, not only of regeneration, of everything associated to sustainability and so on. But what does it mean that it has to be part of strategy? It means that regeneration has to be directly connected with value creation, what we understand by value, in a wider context, meaning in a cultural and societal context, what is a good life, what is the meaning of our presence here. But in the context of business, creation of value, what is that with a lens of regeneration? And I would say it is to contribute to a future of that I will call ecological well-being. I will come back to that. To make sure that the company, the business, is contributed to a future of ecological well-being, for the communities of people it serves and for the ecosystems. And that can be translated. We will not get into the technicalities here, but there are different approaches to that, which are related to the fact that our ecological footprint, the energy and material footprint of humanity, is way too high for what the earth can absorb, can bear. And it's extremely unequal, extremely distributed in an extremely unequal form. So strategy, value creation, in my view, have to start thinking, and I will come back also to that, in terms of how does my business contribute to the ecological well-being of the communities I'm serving in specific contexts. And in that sense, globalization is a very, as many aspects, of course, some are positive, but it's very much misleading, particularly in relationship with the concept of what is value creation and what is the value of time. So third message is time. We have become used to the idea that value can be created in intraday markets, extremely short-term time spans, and that we can create value out of the destruction of value, out of bad news that we are able to anticipate in the future. We can make money on that. I mean, this is from many different perspectives, this is weird, right? So we could speak a lot about the effects of this extreme financialization that we have and how it has been increasingly disconnected from biophysical realities. But I want to highlight this aspect of time in the sense that from the perspective of business executive, but also shareholders, and I will come back to that, we have to have a perspective of relationship to time, to the past, where do we come from and where we go, and the future generations. That is very different from I want to make profit in the next 5 minutes or in the next 5 days or even in the next 5 months. And that's it. That's all my involvement with this business, and then I go from one business to the other. The good news, because because we have been in this trap of believing, because the numbers look like that, the official figures look like that, that this short term is creating value. Just want to quote somebody who is not suspicious of any radicalism against business, somebody like Warren Buffett, who called the financial derivatives, as weapons of mass destruction of value. So let's have that in mind, the relationship to time. The good news being that there are actually plenty of investors and ownership modes of ownership of businesses where you can have people influencing the decisions who have in mind more than next day or next month, but who are really thinking about next generations. So that's an important aspect of regeneration. Fourth message is, what is the sort of the proposal of a guiding star, if value has to be considered in a different manner, what is that value? I would say it is ecological well-being, meaning equitable well-being for humans within the planetary boundaries, and not as two separate dimensions. It is the same. I try to reduce the expression, and this is why I say ecological well-being, because it's not about, on one side, doing good things for the environment, for nature as something separate, and on the other side, doing good things for people. The two dimensions are intimately connected. And a key element for business is, how do we redirect the strategy of the business, but in particular the capacity, the tools of research and innovation. In business, innovation is always the tool of building up a different future. Are we using innovation towards that goal of ecological well-being, or not? I would say, the resources invested in innovation, in research and innovation worldwide, are something like $2.5 trillion per year. That's huge. Most of that is not being invested in ecological well-being. It's invested in many other things, including power, including and in particular military power. So, but businesses have an opportunity to, from an acceptation that this is a strategic goal, invest in ecological well-being, for instance, by asking themselves, how can I reduce my ecological footprint? And there are ways to measure that. There are ways to get into the details. Of course, there are a lot of knowledge to be mobilized and a lot of details to get into. But this is one of the key issues. How can provide value for the communities that I serve, while I do that at the minimal level of ecological footprint. And I'm completely aware that this means different things in different places, Basically, without simplifying too much, but we have a number of countries whose ecological footprint is way too high, and other countries who aspire, with all the legitimacy to do that, aspire to higher levels of well-being. And that could happen, on one side, reducing dramatically the footprints, while not necessarily the well-being, if it is more equitable. On the other side, increasing the well-being while not necessarily increasing dramatically the footprints. And so the fourth message is, use innovation in the direction of ecological well-being. And the fourth, and I finish with that, the fifth, sorry, and I finish with that, is communities and relationships. There is something that we have to look at if we are business people, whether executives or investors or whatever, which is reconsider risk, and the huge amount of investments are always about the risk also the risk, ignoring the risks of the destroying the ecosystems and many others is suicidal for the value that we are supposed to create. And then an interesting evidence which is starting to come out is that the best way to handle that is to invest in communities, to look at solutions from the ground in real contexts which are shaped by geographical, historical, and cultural backgrounds. Means that the responses do not look the same in Indonesia as in Spain. They are very different, but in both cases, they have to serve the communities and bet on the health of relationships within the communities and between the business and the communities they serve, because that's the core of actually of healthy well-being. And I stop here for now. Many thanks.
Thank you, Carlos. That was extremely rich. There's so much there. I was taking copious notes and wondering how do I now try and gather your various thoughts and distill it so that we could talk about one or two things. And particularly with the audience in mind, the audience I'm imagining are those who are, I'm hoping, tens of thousands who will be watching the recording. That's really the whole purpose of this series, so that we keep it, we share it with people across the world. So if I could ask you to imagine that a young professional, a student from a university, and we have now 10,000, up to 10,000 students from Nigeria who've signed up to will be signing up to the platform, others from Asia, even Europe, the United States, etc. Listening to you and saying, in a way, what you're saying, if I'm not getting you wrong, there has been a systems failure that has allowed the destruction we've talked about. Otherwise, we would all not be engrossed in this pursuit of reversing the sort of debilitating trends we're seeing. And you're proposing some solutions to it. You've even suggested that there are some pathways and some are leading. But before we get to that, again, reminding ourselves that if there's a young person out there watching you, and there will be many, I hope, they might want to know and you said the past is important to plan, to understand the present and to look at the future. What broke down? How did it break down? And particularly in that sense, I would like to ask you to also address the issue that I'm fascinated by, which is how is order maintained within even just sovereign boundaries in the state, etc. So how did the rules break down? Why did it become such a systemic failure as you've outlined?
That's a very good question, not for not for the time of discussion we have, but I would
Just
say
a short synthesis of your views on this.
my short synthesis is that the philosophy of modernity has been built on separation, on the idea that we humans are separated from nature, but also on the idea that there is an us and them, and of course that perception of us and them has been there since the beginning of times, but not the way we deal with that relationship. So because it has become extractive, massively extractive and exploitative. And this comes from this disconnect. I mean, curiously enough, modern science has given very effective tools for processes which have been terribly destructive for the fabric of relationships, of our relationships within humans, between different cultures, and between us and nature. And of course, this is the whole history of colonization. The colonial mindset that I am because I'm part of us, and we are the good ones, and we are morally superior. I am allowed not only to ignore who are them, but also to exploit, and to exploit nature for our means, for ends, and to exploit other people, and even to discard other sources of knowledge, other cultures, whatever their brilliance, in terms of history. So these, at the core of this mindset, I mean, in a way, what I'm saying to you is that there is a mental mindset which has been at the origin of this failure. But the issue is that that mindset has been there has been a process of vicious circle of positive feedback from what that mindset was trying to do with the means that modern science was providing to that mindset, because then it became possible that I mean, processes of colonization have been there for the whole of history, but then they became massive and massively destructive. And not only that, they created also opportunities to create new spaces, where you can apply them. Look at what happens with cyberspace and how it has been transformed into a neo-feudal space, with cyber lords also having colonized that cyberspace. So that would be my
Right, right. So let me pick up on something that you said right at the start, which I found really interesting. You talked about the need to overcome our understanding of the old, the issues about the centrality of power and wealth, and that there are no recipes. And essentially, you said a key idea of this regeneration, in your view, is actually regenerating our minds and rejecting the old. So that's a good one, got me thinking as well. What other aspects are critical when you talk about regeneration?
but in these regeneration of the minds, there is something which is a challenge, which is the balance between the inertia and real innovation. And the tricky thing that a lot of what is described today as innovation is actually reinforcing the destructive trends. So, for instance, artificial intelligence, to name something that everybody is speaking about. Is it regenerative? Is it an achievement, an incredible achievement of human intelligence that will fix all the issues and so on? Um, Honestly, the way it's going, I don't think so. I think more or less the opposite, because the way it is framed, it is reinforcing this idea of we take control. We take control of people, we take control of not only of nature, we take control of people, we take control of minds. And we convert billions of people into unpaid workers for some digital platforms. So a key aspect for me of regeneration, and and of course this is related to the change of mindset, but this is very practical at the same time, is how do we conceive another way of doing innovation, as I said. Taking, this idea of ecological well-being as a starting point, as the starting question. And it's not the case in most of the processes of innovation that we have nowadays, because those processes are either driven by the looking for immediate profits, but profits in terms of capturing the attention and resources, etc. Or often connected, looking for control.
Right. So can I try and probe a bit more, Carlos? Particularly again, given my interest in making sure that young professionals and students who will be listening to you, to this video in the months to come, say, hey, I'm interested in this field. What does the regenerative economy mean in that field? So I hope I'm not putting you on the spot by saying, but I know you're well versed in these topics. But let's just say, looking at regenerative, the economy with respect to agriculture and fruit production. What would that look like? Or regenerative economics in relation to mobility, for instance. What does that look like? Or something else in terms of the way we look to a regenerative economy with regard to energy usage. So if you could, pinpoint a few things, and I know you have many examples, I'd like to give the learner some indication that there's a philosophical side about, mind capture, changing all of that. That's regeneration. Or in the world they are going to enter as professionals, what does that look like if they're going to enter the food and agricultural sector? How would they do things differently from a regenerative economy perspective, the energy sector, transport, mobility, etc.? So
let's
can
take,
I
for
hand that
instance,
over to you? Yeah,
the example of energy,
yeah.
and how deep it goes. Um, it goes as deep as the following. This is not regenerating, not just a matter of shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energies. That's the first level of learning, if you wish, which is, we keep everything else the same. And in particular, what does a good life mean? And that does a good life mean has been, established in recent decades by the Western mode of consumerism, So we keep that, but we just change fossil fuels by renewable energies.
I love that example. Very good one. So there's a lot to think about, and I hope people are listening, but carry on. Yeah.
So no, that's not sufficient, especially because but this is how it has been framed up to now.
Yes,
Energy transition has been framed as, no, we have a good model of society,
that's right.
with a good idea of what is a good life, with the right idea for what is a good life, and we just need to shift from fossil fuels to renewable. This is not regeneration. Because even if I believe that, yes, renewable energies are part of the solution, are part of the response, if you think that we need ever-growing levels of energy consumption per capita, even with renewable energies, we're doomed anyway, because of plenty of reasons, in particular, of course, the role of
Thank you. Thank you for making that
materials.
very important point, which I feel is extremely ignored by most people who just say, let's go towards renewables, but let's keep everything else the same. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to emphasize that point. Carry on, please.
Yeah, but the regeneration means, no, you have to find out another definition of well-being, because that concept of well-being that we have, that is dominant, is a concept structurally based on inequity. I mean, the model we are providing is, a good life is being the best life is that of the richest man on earth. And I deliberately use the term man, not human, for obvious reasons, So is the richest man on earth the happiest one? I would sincerely doubt, but the problem of that model is that if you are not the richest one, by definition of this structure, you are unhappy, right? You have to aspire to be richer. And that's intrinsically inequitable and intrinsically not sustainable. This is not how nature works. There is no, I'm not giving a naive picture of nature, but there is by very far no level of inequity of this kind in natural life. So then you can reformulate the question by saying, but what do we need energy consumption for? Is the goal energy consumption, or is the goal to have a healthy and good life? And what does it depend on? And then you realize, and this is scientific evidence, that a good life depends on the quality of your relationships with others and with nature. And then it's a completely different question. Then you can focus on, well, but then it's not necessarily more energy, because until now, in the model of development oriented by GDP and the usual parameters, the more energy we spend, the better, you know. Why not? Regeneration is about, yes, you need to spend energy to be alive, and you need to get that energy from your environment, but in a way which makes possible the regeneration of that environment, that you are not limiting the capacity of that environment to give you those resources next year. And then it's a matter of reconceiving the investigation you do. You know, what would be the right levels of energy spending to give, and you know what, to give a good life to everybody. And there is also scientific evidence that says something. The first time I read that, I was, wow, shocked. I mean, impressed. So if we think of giving a decent life to everybody on Earth, every human on Earth, the typical approach is, oh, we will need to spend much more energy than we're spending now. Well, the reality is that if we address that topic from a perspective in which we consider that giving a good life is something based on good relationships, good institutions, good access to public services, and a high level of equity, which does not mean total equality, then we would need half of the total energy that we are consuming now.
Thank
And
you, Carlos. Very, very good. If I may add that it's a question that I have raised and spoken about at conferences about, fossil fuel reduction and renewable energies, etc. Excuse me. And one of the things that I will just add to what you've already said so well is that more energy, whether it's renewables or not, will also lead to more extraction because we use the energy for certain things, more consumption, and it will create very perverse outcomes anyway. So I think you implied that, but I just wanted to also make that explicitly clear.
yep,
Then
absolutely.
yeah, so we'll just keep extracting more things, but we might have less CO2. So what? And I think the same arguments you made would apply to the other things I talked about, mobility, food production, and all of that. So one of the things you mentioned there that I think should allow us now to also extend our conversation a bit more, I think hopefully in an interesting fashion, is the question then that you said the good life with energy is not simply about allowing people access to more of everything else, but it's also about relationships, etc. Now, that sounds very good, but as you said, the world is a big place, and there's a lot of people without access to the basic energy needs as well. So for many of them, basic energy needs, whether it comes from renewables or not, would be a basic fundamental human right. And so one of the things that I would like to explore with you very briefly is what is essentially the economy for. It can't be simply for relationships, as much as those things are really important. And we don't live in a world in which we can keep nature pristine with, 8 to 10 billion people, etc. But we do know we cannot continue to extract in the way we have and then externalize all costs. So I wonder if you could help us to understand the question about, therefore, what is the economy actually for in terms of however one defines well-being, which is what does that mean in the different contexts, and what do our relationships mean if we don't have access to the basic needs as well. So this is a question I'm also been pondering. I have my own views on it, but I think you touched on it. So what is the economy actually for? Why do we need energy to drive the economy? You've explained it's not just so that people can have a good life based on keeping everything else the same, dependent on huge amounts of extraction and exploitation. So this is a question about, so what's the economy actually for? And given a world that we're going to have 9 to 10 billion people.
Well, I think the economy is to provide for all people to have a good life, and this is not how it works today.
But what is that good life in your view, particularly the Club of Rome's view of a crowded planet? We've had the book, the full world, and all of that. We understand constraints. The Club of Rome wrote that's was seminal in getting the world to understand that there are limits, and now we've reached the limits in which there's so much disparity. Some have so much, and then others are emerging. So, what does that good life look for them? In a world where the existential threats are already converging. So what's the economy for?
Yeah, but this is when it becomes tricky, because I come back to my point on pluriversality. So that question of good life cannot be answered I feel it cannot be answered from a model which is leading us to suicide. Not only ecological suicide, but also, more direct and short-term distraction, in terms of confrontation and violence and so on, It cannot be, so the model of good life, in my view, this is a question that has been very much connected with the history and the culture of each place. And it's not by chance that, the cradles of ancient civilizations, all of them developed. Uh, Ancient civilizations meaning thousands of years, and also we can talk about the indigenous cultures, which are many of them tens of thousands of years old. They developed their own perspectives of what is a good life. And how do you combine that with modern technical means? I mean, we all have to profit from what science and technology have provided, but not in the way it is framed today, because it is framed today in the way as to maximize dispossession of most for the benefit of a very small minority, or even uh, so smaller and smaller minority, I would say. So of course, well-being, and then the response cannot be decided again at one center. This is a good life, for people in Nigeria, you have to accept my definition of what is a good life. No, you have to build that. Of course, I take for granted that this requires a number of material provisions, of provision of material conditions, let's put it that way, that ensure a long and healthy life, that ensure longevity, that ensure, and we are talking about food security, food sovereignty, we're talking about basic things, which of course are necessarily elements of good life.
Thank you, Carlos.
Yeah,
Sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
because
There's lots of questions coming in, and I thought I'd just try and reflect on some. I think you talk about the material conditions, and that's really an important thing. Those material conditions are, of course, not set by individuals. They are set by essentially the society we live in. If you're remote, then it's set maybe by the economic conditions in the area you live in, the institutions, etc. So, how would you say that the importance of the good life, which could also be about just at the same time meeting basic human needs, but how do we get the institutions of the societies we live in? Are the institutions responsible for also ensuring what the boundaries for good life are? Because if they don't, then, as you say, those of us who can exert more power, or the centrality of power resides with us, will continue to essentially behave in ways that do not take into consideration the others. So I thought that would be a good thought from a systems point of view and from the multipolar world we live in, and given the disparities, to have your reflections on. What's the role of the rules, the institutions, or call it the state?
I mean, they are essential, and but at the same time, they can be, shaped with extraction in mind, dispossession and extraction, and or with providing the conditions for what I call ecological well-being. So, but again, point on pluriversality, in different places, because they have very different histories and cultures, require different institutions and different roles of institutions. And again, there is not one right model, and I cannot speak on what is happening for instance, in Asia. I don't know enough, and I'm not, a valid interlocutor to speak about that. You are more than me, but I can speak about what happens in my part of the world, where are supposed to have institutions providing for the common good. And here I see two big issues. One is that common good of certain countries, you know, largely developed um, on on the on the shoulders of most of the world, and to the detriment of most of the world. But also the fact that nowadays the people in many countries in the so-called developed world are feeling that the institutions are not serving them anymore. Because I think the central element of well-being, wherever you look at, is to feel that you have a sense of autonomy, of sovereignty, that you are not constantly being dispossessed, so that you need to do more and to become again a serf, you know, to have the material conditions that you need to have. And this is a very clear phenomenon in the Western world, this mistrust about institutions that we hear about. And institutions, again, are central to this discussion, is based on the fact that people have felt that, yeah, people don't trust the institutions because the institutions don't trust them, and are working, have been working, willingly or not. That's another discussion, for the dispossession of people.
Very,
And
very
of course, this
interesting.
is a matter of social fabric
Yes.
and how institutions are built in different societies and different cultures.
And Carlos, thank you for, being very honest and saying that none of us can talk about the whole world. We can talk about the parts that we perhaps know and suggest certain things that we observe in other parts of the world. So in terms of what you've talked about Europe and perhaps even the generalized term, the West, why do you think, because I think this is very central to the discussion that you talked about, regeneration from the point of view of understanding what we have today and how do we have changed our mind about the centers of power. And that's what's happening in terms of the shift of economic power, the geopolitics, etc., and the resistance to change. So why do you say that in Europe, particularly, I think you were referencing Europe where you live, that people do not trust the governments, and the governments do not, did you say trust the people? Why is that happening? And can you try and explain that in the sense that a global audience, again, I think about the leaders of the future, the students who'll be listening to this many years from now. Why is that happening? What are the global forces at play that is creating in the old centers of power these tensions?
Well, global forces at play, several of them, but to make something to summarize what happened in let's say these Western worlds, particularly in Europe, is that the political class committed suicide in the 1980s. And in ways, when I say this, many people are shocked by what I'm saying, but this is my feeling of what happened. Again, the political class committed suicide in the 1980s when they decided, that, oh, what we do is not important. We have to give the power to the markets and to technology and all that. But actually, the role of the state is not important. It can be minimized and everything will go well because we will have economic growth, GDP growth. And then from that GDP growth, it will provide for everybody. And of course, this is the so-called, I hate that word because it was not new, it was not liberal, but this is the neoliberal framework. And it was successful, for 40 years. And this is related with global trends, but we should then look at more at what was happening in the USA and the huge imbalances in trade and finance in the world, and the fact that as early as 1971, Nixon, president of the USA, decided to break, from the world order as it was organized, financially speaking. And that created the conditions together with the early steps of digitalization, to the wave of digitalization, financialization, globalization, liberalization, so much more reduced role for the state. And this is not yet being recognized, and culturally now it's difficult to come back from that mistrust, because it's like, can you imagine that medical doctors would say, no, but you know what, our role is not important? Or that engineers say, no, what we do is irrelevant, or business people would say, well, it doesn't matter. Somebody else will provide. But this is what I feel the political class, and not only some parties, the large arc of ideologies.
That is such an honest, and I think, as you said, some might be surprised by what you said, but I think the majority will appreciate the absolute honesty and the simplicity with which you hit it on the nail, that application of responsibility and taking the easy way out by saying that let's markets do it. So it's an ideological abdication to a political economic philosophy which some of us can term neoliberalism, etc. We've got just a few minutes more, so I'd like to, I think, bring some of one point together, and you can, take it where you want in terms of a response. So what I got from what you were saying at the end was that essentially, looking at Europe, and dare I say that in this part of the world, and I can't speak for the whole of Asia as an expert or any something, anyway, but that same phenomena started to creep because it was being exported around the world, the neoliberal economy, and many of our political leaders and architects of the political economy bought into that philosophy. They went into the same schools. Fortunately, that is beginning to be questioned, which is a good thing, but we will see. So the question to you is, are you saying that, to build a regenerative economy, and we touched on what that looks like, both the mind, but then also we talked about things like, and you first have to change the narratives, but then we talked about practical things like energy usage, etc. Are you saying that a regenerative economy does not sit comfortably within the premise and the architecture of the old neoliberal economic ideals? And we have to have
Yeah,
something different. And if so, what does that look like? And perhaps what does that look like in Europe?
I mean, again, I hate this expression neoliberal. But yes, I
Call it
think
call it something else if you want in Spanish or something.
no, what I mean is that mm, what happened from that moment was a form of hysteria.
Mm,
I'm not saying for regenerative economies we cannot have private businesses or we cannot
mm.
have markets.
Understood. Yeah, that's clear.
Uh, you know,
We have to have
I'm saying
markets.
I'm
Yeah.
saying we have to be smarter than simplifying and making things like saying, "Oh, capitalism is only the only version of capitalism or of markets," and markets and capitalism are not the same thing,
Yes.
and businesses and capitalism are not the same thing either, but in particular are not just the neoliberal version of it. So I think we have to work into this space of how do you adapt, and this is related also with some of the questions and what is value creation, adapt the mechanisms that we have, which are many of them very useful in terms of the role of businesses and the role of markets and the role of innovation, etc., with a very different purpose, which is this purpose of ecological well-being, and it's a positive purpose. It's not less bad than what we have. It's much better than what we have. And this requires paying attention to many things which are already happening, also here, but I guess especially elsewhere,
Yes.
where people are taking the control of retaking the repossessing themselves, by saying, well, we don't have to follow the dominant model because this dominant model is leading us to suicide. And I want to say that, and again, I'm not an expert, but my invitation, in particular to young professionals, is please don't look to if you do that, but don't look to the Western countries in search of the models for your future. If you are, in anywhere in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, I mean, you look at what happens here, yes, and that's some examples of what can happen here in terms of regenerative companies, businesses. There are plenty of examples, actually, which are not the ones we see on the headlines. So there is something to learn from that. But please look also at other sources of inspiration including your own strengths, the strengths from the culture you come from, because what I'm seeing is that the most interesting examples that I see in other countries, I would just mention Morocco, because I'm working with some good partners there, are strongly embedded in their own cultural traditions, combining, cultural traditions in a place with, yeah, all that modernity, all the helpful things that modernity can bring.
Thank you, Carlos. I think that's a fantastic way to end. You advise that don't just follow one part of the world. I would say, and I think I will use the fact that I come from this part of the world to also say to people from this part of the world, but don't just look at home for your answers, because you can also become very parochial, and we've seen that as well. So learn from the best of both worlds. Look to the West, look to Africa, look to the Middle East, look at home. But everything is local, and the political economy, the social context is extremely relevant. Carlos, I just feel that this 60 minutes has just flown by, and I don't know where it's gone, because I'm just starting to unravel all these deep thoughts. So, but we have to end now. I hope you feel it's been worth your time coming and sharing some incredibly important things. I think this stuff will be listened to by many, and with your permission, we'll try and drag you back here in one of the future series. And I can't thank you enough for, as the Secretary General of the Club of Rome, joining us, giving us the privilege of having you and sharing your thoughts, and getting the members also involved. So thank you very much. And I'd like to hand over to Rohan to just say a few final words of both thanks and some of the formalities. Thank you, my friend.
Before that, let me thank you and all the people who are connected. It was really a privilege, and I enjoyed it very much. Also challenging, but this is through challenges that we can develop the capacity of to learn more, and very happy to continue the collaboration with me personally involved or not, but to continue this collaboration starting today, between the Club of Rome and GIFT.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Rohan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Carlos and Chandran, for the conversation. I agree that there's some parts of that are hard to have. It's a hard conversation to have, right? But that makes it a good conversation. And so our audience members, we hope you enjoyed it as well. If you want more hard conversations and interesting topics that we're going to explore with the Club of Rome, please look out for our upcoming webinars that contain fantastic speakers like Gaia Harrington and Nadia Skalik as well. Also formidable thinkers on governance, ethical leadership, sustainability, and systems thinking as well. So again, thank you everyone. Do give GIFT.ed a follow on our socials if you haven't already, and same goes for the Club of Rome as well. You can find us both on LinkedIn and other socials too. Thank you so much. I know we've overrun slightly, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye now.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.